This word satrap is a very strange word. It just means a governing official. Okay, that's all it means. That may be how I refer to it. 120 satraps, these governing officials, Darius appoints them to oversee the kingdom. He divides up the kingdom and has them looking after it. And then over them, he appoints 3 high officials, of whom, guess who? Daniel was one, to whom these governing officials should give account, so that the king might suffer no loss. Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and governing officials, because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Then the high officials and the governing officials sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, but they could find no ground for complaint or any fault, because he was faithful, and no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." Pause there for a second. So the opening of the story is packed with a lot of detail. What's happening? What's happening? Let's gather in our thinking what's going on here. The new king has come to power, as we found last week, and he's attempting to consolidate power, right? He's trying to get a handle on the kingdom he just conquered. And he begins to organize the kingdom by appointing 120 officials. And like I mentioned a moment ago, he divides up the territory among them. And they are charged with overseeing it and gathering the taxes for the king and so on and so forth. Over these 120, he appoints 3 high officials to whom these 120 would be accountable. Now the reason for this is made clear by the text. Obviously there is a lot of corruption going on. And so he wants to know, he puts a series of checks and balances in place. Very wise behavior. The king understands human behavior. He knows the corruptness of the human heart. Now, in the midst of all this, one man emerges. He shows himself to be a very noble character, the man Daniel, whom we've been following now for 5 chapters prior to this. It says of Daniel, he distinguished himself because an excellent spirit was found in him. He was faithful in the work that he was asked to do. He was hardworking. He was diligent. He was competent. He was loyal. He showed up early. He looked good. Right? These are all wonderful things to be as a follower of God when you're employed by somebody. You're representing not only, you're working for your company, but you're also representing God. Remember that. And so this Daniel he's excelling amongst the rest of these. He shows himself to be so competent that he was eventually going to be promoted to prime minister. Now, Daniel posed a problem, rather, for the other guys, the other 122, these other ruling officials. Number one, he was in the way of their plan to profit through corruption. And number two, his very existence was making them look bad. And so they decided they got to get rid of him. Now this posed a problem for them because Daniel shows himself to be faultless. He couldn't be bought off. He couldn't be corrupted. He was very good at his job. So they had to find a way to get him out of the way by trapping him in his own integrity. They knew that he would not violate the law of God, his God, the one true God, under any circumstances. We talked about this principle in a previous message, that God's authority trumps all human authority. And so what they do is they plan the plan that they conceived to remove him would have to include somehow placing Daniel on the horns of a dilemma. And somehow, some way, he would have to be forced to choose between violating the law of God and violating one of the king's commands. And so we move on now to verse 6. These high officials and these satraps, these governing officials, came by agreement to the king, and they said to him, O king, Darius, live forever. All the high officials of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps and the counselors and the governors are agreed that the king should establish that whoever makes petition to any man, or any god rather, or man, for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Verse 8, now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document and injunction. Okay, now we have their plan. And notice it begins with a lie. They said, all the officials have agreed to this. What they meant was all the corrupt officials have agreed to this, those who wanted to destroy Daniel so that they could profit through their corruption. They left that part out of their plan, of course. Daniel is conveniently absent from this meeting. The man, by the way, who would have been prime minister. And what's curious when you're reading this is that Darius doesn't notice this. He doesn't pick up on it.